Hi everyone, it's Friday night and this time around it's Talking Family History's bonus session where we're going to try and break down some of those brick walls or give some hints, aren't we, Michelle?
Absolutely, and we're all ready to go multiple times now, so let's get cracking, shall we? So for those of you that are new, welcome. We hope you enjoy this evening. It's not quite our usual Talking Family History format. Normally we have a news update for whatever's new in the last 2 weeks, because normally we meet every fortnight. So there won't be any news tonight because we're actually going to talk about brick walls, questions, and hopefully some bright ideas to help you. We're going to crowdsource as well, so it won't just be me and Fiona answering. We encourage all of you to type more answers and links into the chat. And maybe if you feel like keeping on researching, sometimes we've known some members to keep researching into the evening. But whatever it is, we've had 13 of you sending questions. We're going to try and cover as many of them as we can tonight. And I think you have been feeling like this, and we hope we can shine some light on it for you, even if we don't completely crash down the brick wall. It's all about kind of giving you a helping hand and pointing you to some of the puzzle pieces you may already have. You just haven't worked out how to put them together yet. So these are in no particular order except order of arrival. So Stephen, yours was actually up first. And his question is, who's Martha? He's got a public tree, which Fee's got up and she'll share with us too. Born in Harwarden, I suppose, Flintshire, Wales. Based
in Canterbury, we'd call that Harden because that's the way the place is called.
That's good because, you know, I'm just one of those foreign Australians with a funny accent. 1881, 1901, 1911 and 21. So it's great. He's even got the latest bit of info from the 21. Got her death date. Death certificate doesn't tell him anything more. Cannot work out her maiden name. Ancestry probably has lots of trees with her as Martha. I'm not even going to go to Coldclough, but you know, however it really is pronounced, I'm sure Stephen can correct us in due course. There is one who married a Robert, but that's not his family. I think he's got the one with Henry, and that's the one he's looking for. He's got Henry's surname of Blythe and a Hannah Hayworth in 74, and that's not his Henry either. And he's calling us Obi-Wan Kenobi, so we are his last hope. And what I want now is to find the stop share screen button, which I've completely lost control of, which is really handy. Can you stop my screen share, please, Fee, because I can't.
I can. One moment. I'm just also trying to answer someone who can't get in.
Oh, right.
So let me just bring that back because I'm actually going to share my screen over here because this is Stephen's public family tree. And this is Martha in question, I believe, Stephen. Now, Stephen, if you are here.
It is, yes.
It is. Excellent.
Her, the scary lady.
Yes. She's not a scary lady. She's just a person in your family tree.
Sure.
And Henry and Martha appear to have, I think there's 4 or 5 children, isn't there? 4 children floating around in here.
Yes.
With Frank and Ada and Harry and John. And Harry's your person of interest in particular. Okay, so Michelle, can I just get you to answer the Facebook message?
Oh, fine. I will go and do that.
If you can go and do that. It's actually a message in the post. That would be great. And I'll get started on this one. Okay, so the first thing that I looked at when I saw your query, Stephen, was I actually went off and looked at the GRO indexes. And I'm not sure if you've been looking at those ones or not, but I know why everyone, as you say, seems to have a particular name for Martha.
Correct.
And that is because hopefully if I pull this down, you will see my screen with 3 sort of screenshots out of the GRO indexes. Are you all seeing that? Yep, with Ada and John and Harry, hopefully.
Yep.
Cool. And so the reason that they've all focused in on this name, Coldclough, is her maiden name, is because John here, although he gets a little bit confused over the censuses as to where he's possibly born, when you start putting these on maps, Golly and Gresford Weir are within cooey of each other as such. And so Wrexham as an area of registration matches quite nicely to this match here. So I don't know, have you bought any of these certificates at all?
Well, that, of course, is not my person is Henry.
No, you're looking for a Henry or a Harry. Yep.
Correct.
Okay.
No,
So
the problem with that person is I found that marriage and it looks correct, but then when you look if you look in the index for her, she marries a different person.
she
It's
does.
always-
Yeah, could Robert Enyon perhaps. I think there's a couple of things. First of all, when you look at Ada and Harry, none of them have, in fact, all three of these children, and I didn't pull up Frank at this stage, I just pulled up these later three, none of the maiden names match.
Yep.
So there's not a maiden name that's actually matching for any of those children to be siblings of each other. So the first question I actually wondered about here is whether or not John Blease might have multiple wives. So I'm guessing that Harry has at some stage put Martha down as his mother on another document. Would that be correct? You're nodding, so I'm guessing possibly he's put it on a marriage certificate somewhere.
Yeah, I can't. I'm not actually sure. When I've been trying to find out her lately, I've just been working on the marriage and further back. I haven't been dealing with the births of the children. They were pretty clear because this is not too far back, and my grandmother was alive, and we have people around who know a lot of the children, so or knew the children. So we're pretty sure about that. It's really the Martha trying to work out, and I can't find if it is that the one that everyone's got. I just have no idea how they've worked that out.
So as I say, I think they've picked it off John here because John's baptism in 1886 matches to this John here who's in the census records, and it matches to the right place for both Golly and Wrexham. So they've gone, here is John Wrexham with the mother's maiden name of Coldclough. That must be Martha. Let's be happy with it.
Yep.
I agree. At this point in time, there looks like there is only one Martha Coldclough in Harden.
Yes.
So, and yes, I agree. She does also appear to marry Robert Enyon in 1872, just to be complicated. But what I did wonder about is whether or not John's mother is Martha, but whether actually Henry or Harry / Ada may have different mothers.
Well, except that in the 1881 census, that Martha is with the other person, and my Martha is in the family with Henry. And
in the 1881 census. Let me just bring that.
Same person, they would have to be in 2 census records.
Which is possible if there's some mischief going on, so to speak.
So this census record here. So in this census record here, we've got Henry down the bottom of the page, I think, from memory. Here he is here. Henry with his wife Martha, who's born in Harden, and son Frank, who's born in Chester. And then if we go to the 1891 census, when we've got all 4 children. So then my next thing is they didn't register the other children, or they're under some totally different surname. Absolutely. Because they're not showing up in those GRO indexes. Now, anyone else playing at home? So if you've got any other ideas in the chat, I'm just bringing up the chat because I can't see that at the moment.
So I'm just going to add, have you looked at the Wikipedia and the Januki information for the parish where this Martha is said to be from in Flintshire. So because often you marry in your home parish, even though it's not where you're living. You often go home to mum and dad's for the wedding. So that would be the first thing I'd be doing, is going to both the wiki at Family Search and the Januki site and drilling into that actual location to see what records have survived or not survived, and where you can find the parish records and not rely on the GRO.
Yeah, all the records I have for my Martha are English records.
That's why I'm saying, did
Yeah.
she go over the border to get married because she went home? And that's something it
Yeah.
might be that those records haven't survived. Also notice there's the movement in the timeline between the children's birth. And then that makes me go, okay, so what are some of the weird ways somebody else is going to spell the surname when someone with a Welsh accent turns up in Cheshire, Leeds to register kids? You know, so is the last name not even going to get pronounced correctly? And if your spelling is correct in all the censuses, then I'm hunting it's going to be the registrar officers. Of course, they might have been non-conformists, and you've got to look in slightly different places relative to each location. I'd be making sure I got the births of all those children sorted as well, because you never know who might be on the christening records. Might be her side of the family giving you clues to her maiden name. Yeah, that would be my addition. Anybody else in the chat got some extra stuff they wanted to add?
Because of course, Harry is my relative, the direct line relative, and I have living relatives that remember him and the rest of the family. So,
but the only Henry Blease and Harry Blease that are born in the right period of time have Worthington and Haywood as their mother's maiden
and
name.
Haywood, there is a Martha Haywood around,
Okay.
that I've seen, but not born in Wales.
Right.
It doesn't mean she knew that correctly either, right?
Right.
So I can give you the example of my husband's. So when I first met my husband's family, they were like, oh, great, another Australian, which was a complete shock, because in my first husband's family, it was, oh, an Australian. We don't want an Australian in the family. So when I met Tony's mum, you know, it's like, I'm descended from somebody from Australia, blah, blah, blah. And I did all this research and found she was born in Hamilton, 3 blocks from where they thought, you know, they left Hamilton to put her ashes in the Auckland Harbour at Manukau so she could float back to Australia. She wasn't born in Australia. She was 18 months old when she went to Australia. But in her mind, she was born there because all her siblings were. So it's also possible that your Martha thinks she was born somewhere when actually she comes from somewhere else.
So the other thing to look at is if you did get that birth certificate for Henry that's got the mother of Haywood, you'd expect to find the father is a miller.
Yep.
Harry as well, obviously, but his occupation is pretty consistent over those census records. That's what I was just flicking through, having a look at there. So it would be interesting to get John's one, because he does look like he's actually born in the right place and have his birth registered in the right place, whereas Liverpool or Prestwich doesn't really go with Leeds, York. And Ada's supposedly born in Leeds and York as well, and none of those are really jumping out at me as being Leeds and York. So yeah, and Elsa's just coming up with the only Frank is born in 1875, but at Congleton with a mother called Barlow. Heather's coming, I'm just reading through the chat now. Heather's just saying tried variant spellings, e.g. Blease, you know, basically replace the vowels with any other vowel. I'd also check under please. I didn't have a look at this, but a B could turn into a P, or it could potentially turn into an H or an R or something like that as well. So it'd be well worth trying absolutely every variation of those names at all. No, his occupation was a miller.
And the other
Sally.
thing I would do, Stephen, is find my past really good for searching without too much info. So just do a search with Harry and Martha. Is that the two combinations? Have I got it right? So, oh no, Harry and Ada. And no surnames
The
at all.
children.
Just put first names and narrow the date range down that you're kind of looking for things. Yeah, for children, just do their first names and narrow down. But the same for the marriage. I would be doing a marriage with you think his name's Harry or Henry, and her name is Martha. And again, do that, no place, just narrow down by the date range that you kind of expect it to be based on all the births.
Okay.
1911 should tell you how many years they've been married. So
It's also really interesting that they're really consistent with the births of the first lot of the family. And then John's birthplace is the only one that seems to change every census record. And when I was looking up Golly to find out where it was, because I'd never heard of it before, one of the things that came up was a primitive Methodist chapel. And so you may have some people that are non-conformist here as well. So it's well worth looking into those sort of records around there, because maybe for some reason they decided that they didn't want to have anything to do with registering children's births or something like that. And so they just skipped that whole piece out of their life. But you may find that maybe there is baptismal records for this Methodist chapel, for example, and maybe he went to that, because when I was looking up, I think it's Buxton the last time he was told us where he was born. So when you bring up Buxton on the map here, and maps are a really good tool to use, that place Golly is sort of out in the countryside in the middle of here somewhere, I think it is from memory. So it's like the third census that he's on, he's gone, actually, let me just choose the closest place that I could have found that people actually recognise, rather than this place that really doesn't exist any longer.
Yeah, interesting that they were very consistent with census records, but then not with, marriage or birth records.
And they're moving around quite a lot. Yes, they're in the north of England, but they're moving with these children sort of every time. So between 13 and 9, you would potentially expect there to be another child.
Yeah.
Potentially between 7 and 4, you'd expect there to be possibly another child. This 13-year-old, was he born before the marriage or was he born after the marriage? Is he really Henry's son or is he Martha's son? So because she's 25 when she's having him, so has she already had a first relationship? Is that first relationship causing some of the confusion with what her maiden name is, possibly?
Yeah, I tried looking at multiple marriage. I couldn't work it back.
But I think the non-conformist thing's your biggest hint to go looking further at, and double check the number of years they've been married in the 1911 census and see if that falls between the ages of the children, and gives you a clue that there's been more than one marriage, because he could have married 2 Marthas and you wouldn't know as well. And I'm also surprised how often someone uses one first name when actually their first name that they were born with is completely different.
Yeah, so, and the problem with that is old Martha is a widow in 1911.
Oh, so
doesn't tell us how long she's been married.
Yes.
It was a good thought.
It was a good try. John Bleeth the miller, who's in Whitechurch, 1869. Yeah, Sally's just putting some information about a John Bleeth, who is a miller.
Yeah, I just searched the Welsh newspapers online and tried a few different keywords, and I thought, oh, it's got Miller, it's got Bleeth, and roughly around about the same date. I know it's a different first name,
but we must
Welsh
move on.
Newspapers are really good.
Otherwise, we're not going to get through any more. So I'll leave you with those couple of clues, and I'm going to stop my share so that Michelle can bring up the next one.
And press the button.
Thank you.
That's okay. I hope it helped. I've left the spotlight on. You might want to turn that off while I push too many buttons to get rid of all
I can do that.
my screen. Belinda had a long list, so I'm glad you've turned up, Belinda. So I'm just going to, hopefully that vanishes far enough away. So she's got the White House family, and there've been lots of them. This is a huge challenge because lots of them have been trying to work it out. He's a brass founder with no birthplace listed. It was a great question because you actually included so much information all the way through. When his wife dies, so it's horrible in Tasmania because they're burial records with no other useful information. You've got to rely on the newspapers to try and give you some help. The interesting thing of he's written to claim to come out. So he's petitioned the Colonial Office. So there's going to be coal set records somewhere for 2 sons in the 18th year to sustain himself with another young one coming. And that he's served with the Warwick Fencible Cavalry. And that was my biggest clue to everything anyway, the fact that he served in that. Brass founder by trade. And it goes on, so I'm going to, I will post this lengthy question in the chat in a minute. Records were found by a relative in Kew, quite deteriorated, and managed to find Edward and William in the same regiment, and we presume they're related, as men were paid to recruit others, but this is just a thought. His regiment marched through the Midlands, went to Yorkshire, got a list of where they went, etc., etc., etc. They've only got one small mention in the newspapers. And we still have more about Edward Jr., claims to be born in Birmingham on a year later, the grant, on a later land grant, and he dies in 1851, more useless Tasmanian records. And then you've got William, who came out with Edwin. Edward probably died in jail, possibly not found a baptism in the UK, but found he was baptised in Sydney with a birth date stated and Birmingham. It's interesting, isn't it, how often in the early records in Sydney there are very late christenings with early birth dates. I've got one of a birth in 1804 and the christenings in 1829. Really helpful because there was obviously enough pressure in the society to force them to go and get christened. So it does give you some clue that they may have changed religious practice or they know they weren't christened in the first place. That can be an indication that they were illegitimate. So you've got a couple of avenues in there as well. And so she needs to find, and they've done lots of DNA, which is really helpful. And I'm going to go and press, I can actually see the stop share. I'm going to put the question in the chat as well, because there's lots of it. But my first point that I wanted to raise before I put it in the chat is that you really need to look at the original pay and muster books for every single year for the regiment. In my experience, it's worth looking at the microfilms that I know are at the State Library in the AGCP collection. I think they were in that collection. But anyway, the State Records Office for New South Wales did not keep the pay and muster microfilm. They went to the Mitchell Library. I don't remember off the top of my head if any other locations got them. When I searched them, though, they're a very old microfilm and they didn't capture all the markings and notations on the documents. And so I solved one of my brick walls with military around this time that we're here, was by actually seeing the originals at Kew and turning the pages and following them backwards. And at the time they signed up, it noted where they were from. Now, they noted it in red ink, and red ink doesn't come up on microfilm. So you may need to pay someone to do the search for you at Kew, but I think that's possibly your best bet. So if anybody else has got some comments to add, I'm just going to try and get that into the chat because, yeah, it's really hard to work out. You know, newspapers at the time that they came out, you've already searched, and it's not often that there's a lot of information about the family of convicts. I would go and use the digital panopticon site to see if there's any information there about his criminal activities or the White House family in general that might help you put 3 and 6 together. Anybody got something else to add, like you, Fee? Oh, sorry, you haven't got a mic working.
I have. I'm just answering other queries at the moment. So I left that one for you.
Okay, yeah, I thought that was going to be one of those ones we were tag teaming in. And now I just like it if only my cut and paste would work. So the question's too long to put in the chat in one button. I'm sorry, everybody. So Belinda, can you just answer in the chat? Have you actually searched all the pay and muster books, and have you found the microfilm in Australia?
Belinda's, just for the people who may not have seen the chat, Belinda's just got no mic working tonight, so she's just going to be answering in the chat.
I can't get it to paste anything, so maybe I'm going to go one last time.
I found the other day when I tried to do that, Michelle, I had to break it into little pieces.
I've gone down three times now.
There you go.
I lucky last. Because it is a long question, I know that one. But it was good to have all the places that you've searched. And I do think more newspapers keep getting transcribed, so I don't know how long it's been since you last did a newspaper, but I'll be going back and doing more newspaper as well if I never find the chat again. The last word was county. Yeah. I bet that's not going to work again. Oh, yeah, go. And the other thing I'd go to, because of the Warwickshire thing, I would investigate. There are some books on the history of the regiments. So see if you can find a history about the regiment itself and see where it was located. You know, he could have signed up as young as sort of in his early teens, mid-teens. So you need to be looking around 1930 and 1830. And that's a huge period of time with the Corn Law riots and things. There's a lot of trouble at that time. So, yeah, I'd be doing a bit of a trace the regiment prior to when you think he might have signed and just see where it physically was, because that too can give you a clue as to where he was actually born, because he's signing up near where he was born. So, last but not least, so folks, we might leave you in the chat to talk about that unless anybody's got something they desperately want to say, because that's 2 questions and we're half an hour in.
I'll let you share your screen again, Michelle.
Yeah, I'll just get the next slide up first. So it's a good thing Marilyn from the Warwick is here, because hers is next. Then we just reduce everything else. So where do I look for immigration records for my maternal 2 times great grandparents, Thomas and Ursula Tate, who married in Tingwall, Shetland in 1863. Their first son was born in 1865 in Otago. I've looked in the Hocken Library archives and the New Dunedin Museum, but there seem to be no records for arrivals to Port Chalmers between 1861 and 69, because you've narrowed it down. If you've got something to add before I say my bit, Fiona.
Yeah, the first thing I was actually going to suggest is, have you tried the Port Chalmers Museum? First of all, just in case they have some information. The second one is to use this family search collection, which I'm just putting in here, which is the passenger lists that are coming in. And remember, don't just put in surnames, don't put in any first names and things like that when you're searching, because lots of them are just listed under initials and not whole names as well. And then the last thing I was going to say about that is the fact that the unfortunate thing about that period of time is there's lots of ships coming in and not necessarily a lot of passenger lists kept, which is a real pain. And a lot of the passenger lists that people find have tended to come from newspapers rather than passenger lists as such. And so it's having a good crawl through the newspapers. But also the other thing that's available is at the museum in Dunedin. They have the Oasis database, and that's worth having a look as well, because Bob Matthews created that database, and it has a whole lot of random things on it, and sometimes it will help you locate when the person first got to Otago, that he's found them in records, and that may be well worth happening as well.
And from memory, it's spelled Oasis with an E, O-A.
Yes, it is. It's this here. That is how it is spelled in the chat.
I too have found things at the Port Chalmers manual card index that I haven't seen anywhere else for family. And at the Hocken, yeah, I forgot what the new name is for that. Early Settlers Museum's got a new name now.
Yeah, it has got a new name.
In the Hocken Library, they've actually got some books on early immigration debts owed. So I actually found my Burns family from Ireland and the ship they came on in that list of debtors. And it confirmed the ship and the card I'd found at Port Chalmers. So it might be you actually need to physically inspect some of those books. I can't remember the title of the immigration debtors. I can tell you they were blue books, which is really no help whatsoever. And I'm pretty sure they had nice gold font on the side of the, and so I'd be checking in their library catalogue under the word immigration, and then using WorldCat to see if there's a copy of those books near you to go hunting about. Otherwise, you may need to ask somebody to do a lookup for you at the Hocken. They've got I believe they're part of the Ask the Librarian service.
Yeah, I've actually done that.
Yeah.
You've done all that. Yeah, I just want to double check for you. I know there is a pre-1861 index of people coming into Dunedin, but after 1861, and I'm just desperately looking for my course because I just can't remember the facts off the top of my head. Funnily enough, sometimes these things escape me. I don't know why. I want to say that those early records for Dunedin got destroyed once we were into that next section of immigration. Yeah, provincial government records for Otago, which covers 1853 to 1870. Most of the Dunedin Otago ones were destroyed in the 1890s, which is causing you a big piece of grief like it does many of us.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you needed them to come to Canterbury. Why didn't they come to Canterbury? Canterbury's got most of theirs existing.
It made it easier.
Yeah, so yeah, I would definitely get into those newspapers.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a case of looking carefully through them, almost like actually reading the newspapers, because some of that OCRing is not great.
And just because people used to do this, I would also go and check the PROV site for Victoria, so the Public Records Office Victoria. They have a lot of shipping lists of migrants that came in to Melbourne but went on to New Zealand or other parts, just to see if there's any dates to follow up that are in that shipping time, because you've got the 1863 marriage and you've got the birth in 69. They may well have thought they'd go to the goldfields in Victoria first and then gone, this is no use at all, and they've left. And then if by any chance they've ended up in the Cyclopedia of New Zealand for Otago, if they had any business, they may have paid to have themselves noted in it. And often when they've done that, they've put the ship they came on.
Yeah.
So those would be the other couple of things to check.
It's very annoying because his brother James came 3 years earlier and he's in the Two Toy Museum, nice and easy with his wife and all the information. But this guy might as well have not existed, except he's my great-great-grandfather.
Yeah. Sometimes these brick walls are there to try us and learn that some things we can never solve. That's, is the sad news with some things. But your second question has a really easy answer. So I'm actually going to go to that. You just bear with me, everybody.
Thank you.
So the next question is that Alexander Brown immigrated from Scotland as well, presumably to Wellington sometime after 1891, and so on and so on. But you've found somebody that's possible arriving in Sydney 11th of March 1893, and then going on to Wellington and arriving on the 16th of March. And it's a really simple question. Could that be possible to transfer one ship to another and sail to New Zealand in less than 6 days in the 1890s? And the answer is yes.
Oh, okay.
So it usually was less than it.
Yeah.
That's about, it can be a 5 to 4 day trip. So yes is the answer to that question.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
Karen in the UK. Sidney Dyer, born in 1812, no baptisms, all census from 41 to 01, say he was born in Kennington, Surrey, now Lambeth, married in 35, St. Mary, Islington. Witness Emma Dyer, occupation carpenter, house carpenter. So you try, there is actually no question in this piece. This is everything I cut and pasted. Karen, I'm assuming you're looking for his baptism and who his parents were.
Yeah, I need to know his parents. That's what I'm desperate for.
So when he married in 35, there's only one witness, Emma Dyer. What about the other witness?
The other witness is her father.
And you know who she
Parker.
is?
Yeah, I know who she is, yeah.
And she's not related to Sydney as more than...
No.
But they have the same surname.
No, they the father, she was Parker, Eliza Parker or Elizabeth Parker.
You typed it as Dyer. So
Oh, sorry, they
No, his sister is one of the witnesses. Her father is the other witness.
well, we don't know if it's a sister. That's the problem. It just says Emma
okay.
Dyer.
Right.
It doesn't say relationship. So people have suggested perhaps he was a foundling, but the fact that Emma Dyer is a witness on the marriage rather suggests that
so
he
you
might not
traced
be.
her forward to see what you can find about her and her marriage documents?
What, Emma?
Yeah.
I don't know who Emma was to get any dates. There are several Emma Dyers,
Yeah.
more than there are Sydney Dyers, because Sydney's a very unusual name for that time period.
Well,
There are
except for
literally
the
no
fact that's
Sydney
probably when
Dyer
Sydney got its name. So Lord
Yeah.
Sydney was quite well known.
Yeah, but there are literally no Sydney Dyers baptized in that time frame. There are some later, but they're not. They're old. They're not. Wouldn't be his age.
I'm still thinking out loud. Because I was just
My
gonna
only
say,
thought
you may
is,
have to search every Emma Dyer forward and
yeah,
eliminate
I
the
have been
ones that
working
don't
through
fit.
them. Yeah, I have been working through them, but there are more Emma Dyers than. Yeah, Janet's put late baptism. Yeah, I've been through all the Sydney Dyers that have been baptized and eliminated all of them for that sort of area.
And
There are not that many.
And we'll assume you've checked multiple versions.
Yeah,
of the
because
spelling of
occasionally
Sydney.
it's put some of his pet children's marriage records say Sidney as well. So I've looked at the variations.
And have you looked
Done
at
DNA tests and they don't go back. I haven't
Yeah.
got any matches back beyond him.
You won't yet because not as many English people have tested yet.
No, that's the
So-
problem. Yeah.
Yes.
And have you worked through both the parish registers and the bishop's transcripts for Kennington?
Yes. The churches in Kennington, the main church in Kennington, I think it's St Mary's from memory, wasn't actually built when he was born.
Okay. So
The only
so
thing I'm thinking, he might be non-conformist.
But what
Okay,
is
so
the
hang on,
parish?
let's go back to that first bit first of
Yeah.
all. So St Mark Kennington was looks like it starts parish registers in 1825.
Yeah.
So where were they? What church was the next nearest church then prior to that?
There's one in Lambeth that's Church of England. I
Right.
can't remember what that's called.
So
Yeah.
it may be a matter of going, okay, he's saying he's born here, which is, it's that age-old question of, have you been asked where you were born or have you asked where you come from?
Yeah.
And so if I'm asked where I come from Christchurch. If I'm asked where I was born in Ashburton, but I've never really lived in Ashburton, so it doesn't click in my head as I come from Ashburton. So when he's putting himself on the census record and he's saying he's from Kennington, remembering that early on in this, we're also looking at these being linked to the poor law union. So, there's still a bit of removal and that sort of thing. You're going to give yourself a home base and you're going to call yourself off somewhere so that you don't get removed and moved out of there at any stage. So is it the fact that he's actually from somewhere totally different altogether,
Yeah.
that's where he grew up?
Yeah.
He might have been there since he was 1 or 2 or something like that, but he's actually been baptized somewhere else. And the other thing that could have potentially happened is, was he illegitimate in the first place and he's actually under his mother's maiden name, which you don't know either, just to be painful.
Yeah. And there are literally no Sydney Dyers baptised anywhere in the UK. Well, not I haven't searched Scotland as well for that time period.
Alan's just
good.
pointing, yeah, that Dyer is a Gloucestershire name. So
It's also
I would
Irish
actually,
originally.
yeah, I would get a map and actually go, right, if he says he's from Kennington, and just work your way around in circles of what churches were around on that map at the right period of time, and have you actually looked at all their registers? And when I say look at all the registers, I actually mean read the pages, because transcripts can miss transactions.
Yeah, I've done that before, thumbed through the pages for other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
well
the
worth
same
having
with the
through.
Emmas, like the Emmas that you can find that are old enough to be a witness in 35. The census going forward, are they what, like particularly 41, if you can, I mean, Emma could have married between 35 and 41, but can you find an Emma that fits some locational information, like that clearly points to something similar? So, you know, she's going to be somebody you really need to have a good look at. And then
I did find one family that had an Emma that was the right age for Dyer and in the right location as well, similar location, but they just didn't seem to have any children called Sydney.
yeah, but what occupation did the father have?
Oh, he was quite affluent compared with being a carpenter.
Yeah, so
that's what put me off.
Could he be doing his journeyman? I don't know enough about it, but I just know that when people are being apprenticed, they can be sent away. Then they can be, so he might not be in the 1840, you know, ever be in a census with anybody else. But of course, he's already married, so he's going to be somewhere else anyway. But maybe it's following that.
I'll try the churches in the area, I think.
Yeah. So so I'm going to head to the next one, because I don't think, unless anybody else has got any brainwaves, I'd be still looking at really odd spellings like Oyder and Oider for just that handwriting errors. You could just look at every Sydney and put no last name on it and do a really huge search at both Whamo Pa's Family Search and Ancestry in the early baptisms.
And Liz is suggesting basically just building Dyer family trees for any Dyers in Surrey and just seeing what comes out of them. And I would also look in National Archives Discovery and just see if there's any wills for any Dyers.
Yeah, I can't find his will. I've searched for his will.
No, other people leaving money to him.
No, we want
leaving him, right? Okay, yeah.
So find any wills, and I'm talking about wills that, you know, people have died just after 1812 when he's been born. So he could have been a child and been left money in a will or named in a will.
Yeah.
So just have a look and just see, because it's going to help you build out those Dyer family trees and get an idea of who else is floating around, and maybe Emma will appear in one of those. So it's well worth having a look at that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, next one. I wonder how many we're going to get to, Fee.
I don't know.
Let's find the next share screen as well. This one's push the right buttons, remove this off the screen. One day we will be back to 3 screens and we'll be very happy. So Kathleen, in Christchurch and the mainland, for those of you who aren't familiar with how we talk about places in New Zealand, she's looking for the parents of her 3rd great-grandfather. She's got a likely family, made a timeline comparing them, and the son of this other family as well. She's got DNA matches to the other family, and has she got enough to be sure she's on the right track? Well, Fia, I'm going to make you start that one first, because I know you know a fair bit about this case too.
We've looked at this before, haven't we, Kathleen?
We have.
We have. It's starting to look a little bit firmed up, isn't it, from what you're starting to pull out now?
And I've found a bit more recently.
Yeah.
I found the other family by working back from a DNA match that looked to be on that side, and they had a name in the tree that I followed. It was a middle name in a family, and I found a family. My 3rd great-grandfather's John Atwood. Well, I found a family where the mother was Elizabeth Atwood and the father was William Clark. And they had a son, John, who married a woman of the same Jane, and my John Atwood was supposed to have married a woman called Jane. John Atwood came to New Zealand in 1841 with the New Zealand Company on the expedition, preliminary.
Preliminary, yep.
The men came first and the women and children were supposed to follow. Well, his wife, Jane, did not embark on the ship. Well, going back to this other family, John Clark and Jane, they got married early in the 1830s and had a bit of bad luck with their children. Their first child died. They had another one. They lived in Chatteris in Cambridgeshire. Well, I've just found out this week that they were in Reading about 1838 and had another child there. And the second child they had in Chatteris died in Reading as well. Same family because the address was the same. And then the wife, Jane, went back to Chatteris and had another child in 1840. No records in 1841. In 1851, she has another husband and daughter called Elizabeth, which is what put me back, connected it with Reading, because that girl was born there. I never considered that for the last few years. I thought, oh, that's just random. But I did a bit more following. So Reading is pretty close to Lower Stratton, where John Atwood supposedly left from, because that's where he got in touch with the New Zealand Company. Now, I know if they were the same person, if John Clark and John Atwood are the same person, when John Clark was working in Reading, there is info in the Berkshire papers in that area about the New Zealand Company. So although he couldn't read and write, he would have heard people talking, wouldn't he? The thing is, I've got no solid proof. I've got DNA matches from 2 descendants of John Clark's brother, Thomas, who went to the States, and I've followed them right back. And they don't only match with my father and me and my siblings, they do with another Atwood cousin, descendant, and my father's paternal cousin and his niece, you know, so it's obviously that side of the family, but how do I prove that they're the same person? It's all circumstantial, but it follows. The ages of the kids all match up. It's hard to know how old John Atwood's kids were because he keeps changing his mind. But there again, when you've got about 3 daughters die and keep having children, must be a bit difficult to remember.
Yeah, and
my dog's
sometimes
woken up.
I find with some of these ones, actually the best way to work out is actually writing it up and writing it into sentences, and actually like you're trying to explain what you've done and how you've proved it to someone else. Because as soon as you start doing that and you start writing it up, sometimes it triggers an idea of, oh, I haven't ever actually looked at that particular combination of the names. And also you're writing what we call a proof statement. So you're writing out the proof of what your research is showing you until such time that either something comes up and it absolutely proves it, or something comes up and it absolutely disproves it.
Yeah, I put it all on a Excel sheet on a timeline and matched them up, and that's how I got forward a bit this week. Actually putting it all down and trying to match it up and make sense of it and look for more things.
So
Mm,
what Fee's suggesting is taking the next step, Kathleen, and taking
Yeah.
that timeline stuff and actually writing it up into like an essay, basically, so that you, it's in a way that you can then explain what your ideas are to somebody else. I want to know if
Very
there's
similar to
any-
what you've just said.
Yeah.
yeah.
And the other thing I want to know is I'd like, if it's possible, to gather some Y-DNA evidence. So is there direct male lines within your family in New Zealand and direct male lines of the people in US or the other branches that you have DNA matches to that are on the Clark Atwood side, not the Mrs.
I
Clark,
have
but
had
Y-DNA?
I have had an Atwood DNA cousin, a male,
So you've
test
got-
for me,
So you've got Y-DNA to
Yeah.
collect as well. Okay.
but quite high. There is actually a Clark match who's one of the higher ones.
But you might
His
need to look
parent-
at the trees, like the hypothesis
He
tree
won't
and your
get back
tree.
to me because his parents weren't married. He
No.
wasn't born as a
Yeah, but
Clark.
but there may be multiple branches of Y chromosome in living humans to test.
Yeah, I have followed down. I probably haven't got the courage to approach someone like that.
You don't ask the DNA question first, though. You just say you're trying to research your family and you know, curious about X, Y, and Z, and build a relationship up with them. And one day you'll feel comfortable to ask that question. Certainly very rare that you're going to ask that question the first time you're on a telephone or in an email to anybody. Because it's quite a degree more personal than just, I mean, we wouldn't even just say to the person the first time we know them, can you send me all your certificates? Now, would you? You know, it's the same kind of way. You need to build a relationship up and ask them, say, here's what I've got, or I'm trying to find this. Do you have any information? And just build it up over time. You've got
The match in the States, the wife of the match, has uploaded to GEDmatch for me and would possibly be helpful. The other one over there hasn't got back to me, but I made her tree, took it right back and found the connection. So that's two different children of John Clark's brother.
And you need to make sure that you research back all their lines, not just the line that leads to the Clarks, to make sure there's no other possible shared line of DNA inheritance.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Hundreds of them. Yeah.
Yeah, just on you, but on the people you match, because it is bizarre how occasional you end up finding that some other branch of your family has also married into theirs. You know, I mean, I can, in my extended family of births in the 1790s, I know of at least 2 fourth cousins that are married, and they had no idea they were related. So if we do their DNA, we sometimes end up having matches on all sorts of fronts because there's multiple lines of common descent. So it's just, you have to prove, you know, the typical way of talking about developing a proof standard is you actually try and disprove it. Because if you're trying to prove it, that's confirmation bias. So you do need to gather all that evidence that you can. And that's, at this stage, might just be building lots of trees, but you need to confirm to yourself that there's no other way you could be sharing DNA with these people except the line that you hope is going to be ending up being a Clark-Atwood combination.
And similar to what we were saying to Karen before, I would be looking to see if there's any wills floating around at all that might just, you know, build those trees out a little bit further.
And might mention that, you know, John Clark's or whatever, I can't remember which way the surnames are, but Atwood came to New Zealand, right? Might mention that it's, you know, I'm leaving to my John Atwood in New Zealand. John Clark alias, I'd do a Google search for John Clark alias Atwood and see if it comes up in any of the papers.
The Clark father died before 1841. The mother died in 34. The brother went to the States about 36. And John Clark must have left the hometown about 37. So
but
they're all
you still may have uncles, you may have grandparents that were floating around. So it's still well worth looking, because
Mm.
let's face it, even now we still potentially receive money from people that aren't actually even related to us. So it's just worth having a little bit of a look. You never know what's hiding in an archive that is just random, that someone seems to have indexed for some reason. The other thing to do is look for baptisms for any of those children.
I've got most of them.
Yeah, but the ones that she was having after he'd left, and just see what
Oh.
they all say, because for a lot of those you have the civil registration for them, the birth certificates, but and a lot of those baptisms post 1837 aren't necessarily online for the parishes, so you may find
I've got the child she had in 42 that was more than a year after he left. John Clark's name is on the birth registration. The baptism has got a gap on it. So she can tell fibs to the authorities when she registers, but not to the priest, I guess.
Yeah, I've got exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Registered the name that she was known of in the community, and then christened as a base-born child with the with her maiden name, because she wasn't married to him at all. So yeah, so
and that's obviously another piece of evidence, which is really good.
And follow that woman down to see if maybe she knew she had this strange father. She could have been assuming she was a Clark, and she may have left money to him or had correspondence. You don't know what's handed down in that line, or did she die too young?
I think she was found out. I have found a Sarah the right age in 1851 who's boarding as a 8-year-old. And I can't follow Sarah Clark any further. So,
and the other thing is look up the bastardry court records to see if there was some sort of, because they've moved, she's recently changed parishes from Reading back up to Cheshire, I think you said. From
she went up to
but wherever it is, because she's
Oh.
moved, you might want to look at the bastardry court records for that time frame of that birth, because you never know what they're going to write in those about where the father should have been, because he could have been identified as having gone to New Zealand.
Yeah, because the New Zealand company was paying John Atwood's wife money and sending it to the post office in Stanground, and Stanground was where their last child was born. That was the area that her mother lived in.
So that's why you need to sit down, write all the evidence together, and then you'll be able to get whether you've got enough to feel confident or not. Because you're not ever going to, proof is not the word you're ever going to be able to use. You're just going to need to be able to say the evidence points to this, and the evidence does not point to that.
Thank you.
See, now you're giving homework, and that's a nice change.
Yeah, because especially you giving homework.
Oh, nice. Let's jump to the next question.
I'm going to put I'm even prepared to put the question in the chat first for change. How's that?
Even that, cool.
Cool.
Sarah Jane. Let me find Sarah Jane on the list.
Sarah Jane was here. I made sure she was here.
Yep, I've seen Sarah Jane's name on the list.
She's still here. So welcome, Sarah Jane, to this crazy place. So I'm going to even let you read it out because my voice is going, Fee.
Sure. Where do you start when they have a common name, e.g. William Robertson? I found him on the census with family till 1851, then nothing. Absolutely no facts about where he may have gone. Other family did come to New Zealand, but no way to narrow down. He could have moved anywhere or even died in Scotland prior to 1855. No way to narrow it down, plus would like his death notice info on where he ended up. Did he have family? Can he account for DNA matches that I cannot place? Yes, that would be correct, wouldn't it?
Yes, it can be. It can be. It's like, I don't you love him? He's almost called William Jones, isn't he? Because Robertson's just so common.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I have several of those that I swear they've just been taken away by a spaceship. Scotland prior to 1855 is not particularly good on ever doing anything useful about burials, unless you're really lucky. So that makes it quite difficult because, yes, they could absolutely have died and there is no record for them at all as having died. There seems to be quite a mission happening to actually do as much as possible with regard to transcribing burial records that are existing, any cemetery records, any tombstone records and things like that. I think predominantly because the burial records themselves or the registers themselves aren't very good. 1851, he's with the family. When was he born? I just didn't know that, Sarah.
1824.
1824. So in 1851, he's 27. So it's not like he's an infant and he's dying as an infant. So the really, maybe not the really good thing at the moment. I'll come back to that.
Sharon wants to know which area that he was living in, Sarah Jane.
So he was living in Garfield in East Lothian, Scotland. And he was born in, and I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong, I'd say Whittingham, but I believe it's called Whittingham in East Lothian.
So I would be looking at the other family and just seeing, did he come out as well? The problem with common names is there's a lot of certificates to buy sometimes. And sometimes I've found, especially in Scotland, it is well worth paying a researcher who can actually sit in your register house and just sit on Scotland's people for a couple of hours and open every marriage certificate for you in the hope that you actually find him. Because he may well have moved into Glasgow, he could move into anywhere else. And, you know,
Sorry.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so yeah, I would absolutely think about paying someone, because it's a lot cheaper to pay someone to sit in your register house than it is to fly there, unfortunately. Any other thoughts, Michelle?
Well, you see, your problem, Sarah Jane, because you probably don't know me very well, I have no Scottish research whatsoever. So, you know, that's the bad news. But on the good news front, I'd be really looking at the actual immigration records to see what you can find. Because if you've got them out in New Zealand in the 1850s, they may well have gone to Australia first. Again, it's that gold rush period. So if you can narrow down and find a family, so I'm assuming by the way you worded it, that the rest of the family you've identified in the 1851 census are the ones that came to New Zealand.
No, so his brother came, quite a few nieces and nephews came.
Right.
And then I think, varying nieces and nephews came.
Right. And they came after 55?
Yeah.
Because
his brother came about 54, I believe.
Okay, so it's quite early.
And what part of New Zealand did they come to?
Mainly Canterbury.
Yeah, I was going to say they'll have come out to Canterbury, which is unusual when you're well, a little more unusual when you're Scottish.
A couple ended up in Napier, but most of them were in Canterbury, sort of Temuka.
And what occupation did they have?
So he was a shepherd on the 1851 census, and mainly farmers and shepherds, and
that explains the moving as well.
Yeah. So you, as I say, the first thing you've got the problem is there'll be lots of William Robertsons that could possibly be him getting married in Scotland.
Yes. So
pay someone, ask for 2 hours of somebody's research for Christmas present this year and say thank you very much. That's what I do. But also, just because some of the family came to New Zealand, Australia, Canada, America, all good choices of where he might have gone as well.
Yeah.
You're mentioning about DNA matches. Do they look like they go back to someone called Robertson?
I certainly have other matches like on the Robertson side that I just cannot place. But nothing in their trees jumping out, or some of them don't even have trees.
Yeah. So you've clustered your matches and you've identified the paternal Robertson branch.
Yeah.
And back that far, and you're only concentrating on that group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, some good suggestions in the chat about looking at newspapers. Belinda suggested post office directories, but I'm not sure that you'll pick up your shepherds necessarily in those at the moment. Yeah, Scottish Indexes has another conference this weekend, so you might get a chance to ask a question. So that's a good idea.
Are you familiar with that, Sarah? Do we need to get the link for you?
I'm going to
Oh, that
find
would
it.
be great, thanks.
Yeah. This couple whose names have escaped me, Graham and
Emma.
Emma, they run a business as researchers, and they do a free conference, usually live through Facebook and Zoom. You need to register, and they were looking at changing how frequently they did them, but to reach a global audience, they start at 7 a.m. Their time, and they go till 11 p.m. at night, and every talk's repeated, so you can generally fit a time frame at some point. Yeah.
Thank you.
So definitely worth, and then of course they're the people hands-on that can go and look up the records for you.
Yeah,
Find My Pass for adding more Scottish records. So when I was last
they
up
were.
up
So
there,
it's well worth
they were
having a
making
look
new
there as well.
negotiations. So I'd be also checking at Find My Pass, because they've got quite a lot of Scottish records. A few indexes have turned up at Family Search that were new to me as well. So they're the other places to make sure you've checked. I always recommend checking all the major companies that have online databases by drilling into their card catalogues and looking specifically at Scotland, not doing a top level search, but actually drilling in. Yeah.
The other thing on Scotland's people is to have a look at see if there's any, sorry, I'm just opening up Scotland's people so I can have a look at it. Anything in the Kirk sessions as well. So I don't know whether you've looked at those records at all, Sarah Jane.
I started, but like some of them were handwritten and I had a bit of trouble reading some of them.
Okay. Did they have anything for Whittingham? I'm just.
I can't
That's
remember
fine.
whether it was there was one that I don't think they had.
Currently no volumes for that. So yeah, it would be worthwhile seeing if there are any volumes for Kirk session records for Whittingham that just aren't digitized at this stage, because it may be that there are some and it may tell you something, you never know.
Yeah.
Well, Fee, I've just noticed the time, and I'm wondering whether you want to squeeze one more in, or you think we should be kind of doing our couple of minute wind up.
Okay, how are you feeling? I can do one more if you can do one more.
Okay, yeah, I can do one more. So
I think we might only have one more, haven't we?
no, we actually have a few more. I put them all in I put them all up. Just
there you go.
we were, in case people didn't.
In case we were quick.
In case we were quick, never going to happen. Maybe we don't want this one, but this is going to be your treat, Fiona.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, because you were the one talking to me about this quite a bit yesterday, so you might regret your choice.
Oh,
but here you go.
no.
Here you go. It's from Linda. Solving a mother believed to be of Indian ethnicity of Major Benjamin Sullivan III.
Now, Linda's
around 1792.
I think Linda's in the room too.
Yeah, exactly. I have found baptism records for his believed to be illegitimate siblings, noting that Benjamin Sullivan II, born in 1747, died in 1810 as the father, but no mother name. This Benjamin Sullivan had 5 children prior to his marriage in 1790. So in other words, 8 years after Benjamin Sullivan III was born, he married an English woman called Elizabeth Dent, and so on. And I'm actually going to skim the rest. She's done a Watto chart for descendants.
It's a nightmare.
Of course it is. It is a long shot. You're really at the edge of usefulness for autosomal DNA. And the problem is that Major Benjamin Sullivan III is not carrying the mitochondria of his mother. So you are totally reliant in the DNA fronts on actually the autosomes. And you're very, very much at the edge. And you would need to be collecting a lot of data to confirm it. But that's my comment on it. I know Fiona had a whole bunch of comments for you.
I've got like from the 5 siblings, it appears that they all had the same mother, Indian mother. And so I've got 24 descendants confirmed through DNA, but it's just I don't know where to look in India. for a woman. She must have, they obviously had a relationship to have 5 children. But she's the only one not mentioned in his will, whether she'd already died.
Yeah, so the first thing is I have thrown in the link in there for what we call FIBIS, the Families in British India Society. I don't know if you've been on that website before. She's nodding. So that is obviously my first place I always go to have a look. The other thing is to have a look at Family Search Wikipedia to look and see what records are available for India as well. Because a lot of the records, if they are to do with the British, will obviously potentially still actually be in Britain. So you are looking at records in the archives and the newspapers and things like that as well. The other thing I wasn't 100% sure about was with regard to, I'm going to call them Benjamin 2 and Benjamin 3. So Benjamin 2 is Benjamin 2, the father. Was he born in England?
Yes.
And then went to India?
Yes, as a major in the British Army, yeah.
So
Both
Benjamin
of them.
2 was a major as well. Because Benjamin
2 actually was a Sir during his lifetime, Sir Benjamin Sullivan.
Okay, and he has a son called Major Benjamin. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
that's cool. We'll call them Sir Benjamin and Major Benjamin then. Yeah, Sue's just put in, I would be looking for wills. Absolutely looking for wills.
I've got the will.
You've got the will?
I've got the will, and what he says in the will is this is Sir Benjamin. He says to his wife, blah, 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 which is Elizabeth Dent, the one he married in 1790, everything. And then to his children, he lists all the children born from that marriage. Then he lists Benjamin Sullivan. He gives him a very substantial amount as his friend to buy his majority. I think you could buy to become a major if he wasn't already one. And then to the other 4 children, he's put my dear friends, and he's left them all a substantial amount. But they're the 5 that I found that appear to be his children.
Right.
With all the, to this Indian woman.
So he calls them all friends rather than children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
But he never mentioned another woman, just his wife.
There's quite a few comments in the chat as well. So make sure you save the chat before you leave.
I will, yeah.
I recall seeing a Who Do You Think You Are episode with some records in India, and I'm really sorry to say I have no idea what records that they were, but they were in India, and they named the native woman in the records that the military person was having the relationship with.
Oh,
so it might.
This is what I'm trying to find.
And it might not be back this early, right? So I'm pretty sure what I saw was in the 19th century, not in and you're looking for something
in that
earlier.
century. Yeah.
But that you may get to the point where you have to actually find somebody professional based who specializes in this area, and there's bound to be people that do that. So people, the couple of places I would be looking is the Association of Professional Genealogists to see on their directory if there's anyone that specializes in that particular aspect of Indian research. The other place to look is AGRA. So there's an English-based company, a group of archives, and I always get it wrong. But anyway,
record agents.
Yeah, record agents, thank you, to check them. And then Ancestry Pro genealogists have over 150 staff around the world, and they have contractors and experts in specific areas. So there's the group of places. Sometimes when you need a really narrow time frame. Are you doing the ancestry tip session that I do for the Society of Australian Genealogists?
No.
So next year we've got a military expert coming to speak in March while I'm at Roots Tech. So that's another person that might know. So yeah, if you were in that room, you could ask the question.
Oh, okay.
So you might want to sign up for that next year.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you, girls.
Karen and Sue have both been putting some really good comments in there, being that they're both based in the UK to start off with, which is really useful. Claire's just put in who she thinks that Who Do You Think You Are episode was. Jenny's talking about baptism records to see if there are any baptismal records over there as well. Belinda's looked for the military battalion to see if they have journals or anything like that as well. And the India office.
I found a few
library.
I found a few of the baptismal records of the children before he was married, and it just says natural child of, or natural daughter of, or natural son of Benjamin Sullivan. No woman listed.
And the other odd thing is, I wonder about like Burke's peerage and stuff like that, whatever. There may be some things buried in those kind of records again in a strange place because of his position. Oh, great. Sally's been working on Steve's in the background. So for those of you that aren't used to it, some people get quite addicted and they keep working, and you know, you may get a message from somebody in a meeting down the track. Sophie, I'm just going to start on the last slide with some quick tips that we've put together for people as well. And bear with me. I'm sorry, I'm so tired, folks. It really isn't great to such a croaky voice. But one of the things we did notice, we couldn't, so my apologies to the last 4 or 5 questions I had lined up just on the off chance that I know you're all in the room. And Fiona and I probably work through them and do them as part of our family history, Talking Family History Fridays between now and the end of the year, and we'll email you the comments that our chat room develops if you're not somebody in the chat room. But we did get some questions that really weren't questions, just some, so we kind of thought we'd put a bit of a summary up, how to write the right brick wall question. So the top things is really it's looking at everything around the event and the person to develop a clear question. So have you looked at all the who's, the what's, the where's, the when's, and the why's? Have you narrowed things down, eliminated things, thought about all the spelling variations? Have you looked at all the offline and local repositories, museums and libraries and family history societies, as well as people with personal collections? Because you'll be surprised what people have in their shoeboxes. Do you understand what it's actually written there? Sometimes the sentence is missing because you didn't read that bit. You were just looking at the name and the date at the time. So make sure you have a really good look, drill in, like who's the recipient in a will. Look at the surnames only in all of the wills you can. It's still free to download all the wills from the National Archives. So now's the time to go and find all the surname Dyers, for instance, and just scroll through all of them, as well as the Atwoods and the Clarks for that matter. And as Kathleen did, build that timeline you already know. But also then look around the history of the location. You know, what's going on at the time? Is it the poor law rights? Is there some disease that's specific locally that caused people to move? Is it their job that's causing them to move? Kind of look at the backwards last known location and then kind of think what the push and pull factors were. Sometimes that means that you can end up asking a clearer question and then having better research plan going forward. And as we've said a couple of times tonight, sometimes you just need to hire the right person who's a specialist in that area or is at the right location to do the work for you. One of the freebies that I have been giving away for a number of years now, so if you haven't got a copy of it already, I have a checklist which is free for people, and it doesn't actually matter whether you're down under or up over, but I wrote it initially because all the checklists I could find were only full of the US Census documents. So I've made sure that they're actually for all English-speaking people. They cover a whole range of things, including the UK Census, the Canadian Census, and the US Census, all the electoral rolls available in Australia and New Zealand. But this is just an example of the sorts of different records you may be able to find relative to an event that you might not have thought of. So I'll put that link in the chat if Fiona hasn't managed to pick it up from somewhere and pop it in there. So this evening's given you some kind of clues to looking under the hood of the questions you need to ask and the fact that we can work together and share some info. And if you like us a lot, we're starting again doing this every fortnight next year, covering all sorts of topics. Mostly Fiona and I will talk every fortnight about what we've been inspired by in our research in the previous fortnight. If you subscribe now, you'll get access to all the sessions for the rest of the year. So you'll get a bit of a bonus, really. We'll be emailing you the Zoom link to the meeting, which is next Friday. So you might want to do that or put it on your Christmas card gift list for someone to join in. And you can join the rest of these crazy people you've just met tonight, maybe for the first time. Otherwise, yes, I think most of you are on the mailing list, and we'd like to thank you very much for coming, and maybe you'll be back later on and see us later, Fee.
Yeah, it's been great having everyone join us tonight. A little bit different the way we've done it tonight in comparison to how we've done our normal Friday night sessions. Although sometimes we do go off researching strange and wonderful things some Friday nights. And as Michelle said, sometimes those Friday nights drift on a little bit. We know that some of you now are racing off to have dinner, and some of you are racing off to go to bed, and some of you are getting ready for your first brand new Friday on the other side of the world. So again, thank you for joining us.
And thank you to Alan especially for turning up.
1 a.m. in Seattle is pretty good.
Mm.
I'm quite sure Alan's body does not know what day time it is anyway. So being that he's been all over the world lately.
Yeah, so those that don't know, Alan was actually one of the speakers at the recent Family History Down Under conference in Sydney and Castle Hill. So he's kind of been all over the place.
So yeah. So lovely to see you all. I hope that as we head into that crazy month of December, you get some time for some rest and relaxation, and of course time to do some family history. So thanks a lot, guys. I'm going to click off that recording, and normally what we do when I'm closing off the recording is we all wave from the gallery.
So everybody, catch you next time.
Bye, guys.